Living God, long ago, faithful women proclaimed the good news of Jesus' resurrection, and the world was changed forever. Teach us to keep faith with them, that our witness may be as bold, our love as deep, and our faith as true. Amen. So again, welcome. The theme for Women Together is being a Christian woman in a diverse world. During this series, we explore ways to deepen our faith as we interact with the rest of the world. A special welcome to women attending for the first time. There are 7 meetings a year on the first Thursday of the month from October to May. And just go to the Women Together webpage on the Cathedral website for more information. Women Together isn't something you join. You watch for publicity each month, sign up, buy the Monday prior to meetings, and then attend either on Zoom or in person. And due to COVID, our next few meetings will be held in this hybrid format unless we let you know otherwise. We are hoping to serve meals again in the future, but it all depends on what happens with the virus. So we'll let you know. Watch for publicity. I want to say thank you to all the dedicated volunteers and the Cathedral staff who make this event possible. Special thanks to our tech guru, Bob, to Kimberly, Terry, Beverly, who are hosting, and many other Women Together volunteers and Cathedral staff who work behind the scenes. So thank you so much to all our volunteers. Tonight, our speaker is Dr. Maureen Day. Dr. Day is the assistant professor of religion and society at the Franciscan School of Theology. She's an award-winning author. Her numerous books and articles can be found in both religious and academic publications and include Catholic Activism Today, NYU Press in 2020, and Young Adult American Catholics, Paul's Press in 2018. As a sociologist with training in theology, her teaching and research areas include religion in American civic life, Catholicism, family, and social ethics. Please welcome Dr. Maureen Day.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here with all of you tonight and to have those of you viewing from home tuning in. Just to give you a little heads up of who I am and how I've been acquainted to your parish. The very first time I came to St. Paul's was when Daniel McMillan who was one of my students, near and dear to my heart, was preaching for the first time and wanted a little extra moral support. So I came down to give that to him. And I really just appreciated the welcome, the prayer for liturgy that I got to enjoy while I was here. It was very moving for myself. And then I came again for Daniel's diaconate ordination and experienced the same sort of thing. It was just beautiful. So I've gotten the post-COVID and during COVID, or pre-COVID and during COVID experience. And you definitely have something very special here. So thank you for including me in this. So if we could bring up the presentation, we'll go into this. Great. All right. And so the title of tonight's talk is Ignatian Spirituality and Mental Wellness. Just to give you a little insight, because many of the religious orders within Catholicism have both male and female. I shouldn't say many, but a lot of the older ones have both male and female counterparts within them. The Jesuits do not. So it might wonder like how I came acquainted to those folks. I was public school educated for nearly all of my life until I went into graduate school, and then I was schooled with the Jesuits. But how I learned about them was I did the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. If you've heard of that, it's a 1-year service program. So I was in Detroit with 6 other freshly graduated students, and we were adulting for the first time in our lives. In solidarity with the poor, in lives of shared prayer with one another and with those we served. And so that was how I became acquainted. And then I transitioned into this I was very much steeped in the Ignatian tradition through my graduate school. And then when I applied for a job at the Franciscan School of Theology, which is a different part of the Catholic orders, one of the first things they told me was that, did you know that Ignatius was deeply inspired by St. Francis? So, so ultimately everything you have comes from Francis. And I was okay, got it. So this is how those two traditions kind of merge together for myself. And to go on to the next slide, thank you. And so when I was talking to the committee about when this talk would be placed on your calendar, and I told them the title and the gist of what it would cover. They thought that this would fit well with the holidays, Ignatian spirituality and mental wellness. One of the main things that many people, regardless of if you're a woman or a man, can experience during the holiday season is grief, isolation, or loneliness, right? And whether and we may or may not be experiencing that ourselves this holiday season, but we should. But even if we're not, we should be vigilant to the fact that others may be experiencing this, and to hold a special tenderness in ourselves as we reach out to others and worship with one another, just continually checking in that everyone's okay. And, if someone has lost someone recently, checking in with them and perhaps inviting them to our house or our holiday shopping and that sort of thing. But it's also uniquely a time when women can be especially stressed this holiday season. Because traditionally, a lot of acts of care, which come within the holiday season and far beyond the holiday season, have fallen to women to do. And so with these holiday seasons, it starts with the making of the Halloween costumes, and it carries over into the preparation of Thanksgiving. And, and it's not just the food itself, it's also making the beds and preparing a hospitable place for all of the guests you might be inviting into your home. And then the Christmas season, the Advent and Christmas season is just another a place where acts of care really happen a lot. And we want to make sure that as women, if we are one of those people who are really shouldering a lot of that we're giving ourselves space to make sure that we're caring for ourselves as well. And there is this, and I don't know how far back this goes. Women have been doing acts of care for millennia. This is not new. But there's a tendency among religious communities to downplay the domestic aspects of Christmas, to say, don't get caught up in the decorations, don't get caught up in this and that, and kind of minimizing these things that have traditionally been a part of women's participation in the holiday season. And I want to push back on that and make sure that we feel the space to push back on that. Those are not something that we should push aside. Yeah, there are things like consumer, the shop till you're dropped sort of thing. Yes, like that, this is something we can be critical of. But there's a lot of things about making sure that the traditional recipes that your great grandmother has made has been included in the holidays, the cookie exchanges, the hosting of parties and the attending of parties and the bringing of your dish to the potluck, all these things that we do to really show one another that we care, that are a part of this holiday season. And as someone who is a mother to a soon-to-be 16-year-old and 12-year-old, I know how much, going out to look at lights and, making the time to make sure that we do these kind of ways that we mark this holiday season. I know how important it is to really prepare for that. And it would not feel like Christmas were we to not do those things. And so I just wanted to give us a space to push back on that sentiment as well, to really claim that these acts of care are important for our spirituality and the holiday season. So thank you. All right, so I'm going to begin with a definition of mental health or mental wellness. Mental health tends to be the phrase that we see most often. I prefer mental wellness because to me, when I hear mental health, it's like healthy or not healthy. I hear it as a binary, right? So if we've crossed some threshold, but wellness, have we exceeded this minimum level of health, and we're not in this stage where we're unhealthy. Whereas wellness really pushes us to not just hit those minimums, but really try to strive into those maximums. So we can think about how are we going to thrive in our mental wellness. And so just using this definition from the National Institute of Mental health includes emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, act, make choices, and relate to others. Mental health is more than the absence of a mental illness. It's essential to your overall health and quality of life. Self-care can play a role in maintaining your mental health and help support your treatment and recovery if you have a mental illness. So we can see that this is I think this is a great definition. And then there's also these aspects, they're lifting up the emotional, the psychological, social. These are all different dimensions of the human person, right? And our overall wellness. And you might have seen that I just pulled this one, the 6 dimensions of wellness, but you could find 5 dimensions, 7 dimensions, et cetera, of different sorts. And this one happens to list emotional, occupational, physical, social, intellectual, and spiritual. And one of the things I think I really want to amplify, even if these distinctions are helpful, we should think of them as analytical distinctions, but not actual distinctions. So it's helpful for us to kind of assess our intellectual health on its own, but know that our intellectual health will affect these other dimensions. So it's not this isolated part of ourselves. It's really integrated with the others. So just to think about like our physical health, if we were to neglect that for the sake of bringing health to the other dimensions, you can just imagine how if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're struggling with some sort of chronic or temporary illness, that this is going to affect your overall well-being. And you can see my mom who has fibromyalgia, I see the way that when this came into her life, that how it's affected the other dimensions of her wellness. And so the way that she creatively has figured out ways to mitigate those, and to work through these and how to amplify the other pieces so that she can have a mentally well way of living. And another thing too, since this is a focus on Ignatian spirituality, but we can also think about spirituality more broadly, that this is spiritual dimension. We want to we're going to focus in on this one, but our spirituality, like the other dimensions, really we should think of them holistically and the way these are all integrated into one another. All right, and so we can go to this one. Okay. And so just to talk a little bit about self-care, and this is again from the National Institute of Mental Health. They talk about some of these practices to get regular exercise, to eat healthy, regular meals and stay hydrated. That's actually one of my, I'm very good about keeping myself hydrated. And these kind folks put some water under the podium, but I'd already brought my own. I wanted to make sure that I was going to be okay. And that's actually one of my self-check red flags is when I realize that I'm thirsty, because as I'm so diligent about keeping myself hydrated, that if that one's fallen away, I know that lots of other things have also fallen away. So it's kind of it's a really good litmus test for me. Make sleep a priority, and it's okay if you need to cut sleep one night. That's okay. But it's when it becomes a chronic thing that we're cutting into a regular pattern in our life. Trying a relaxing activity, setting goals and priorities. This is another one that's really important, especially as people phase into retirement, or if you're not working. A lot of people feel this when their final child leaves the house, that this is a big transition moment for them in this dimension. But setting goals and priorities is really important for our sense of purpose. And just to disentangle meaning and purpose, because meaning is very important for our mental wellness as well. Meaning people tend to think about as what's come behind us. So our past, what has happened, what are the events in our lives, and what do they mean to us? How do we reflect on those and see the way they've shaped us for good or for ill, and to consider those. Whereas purpose tends to be what am I going to do? It tends to be a focus and a mission that we feel that we have. And so as we transition out of occupational roles, especially through retirement or having that last child leave the house, we can start to lack that sense of purpose. And so this is why it's especially important for people, if are transitioning into out of a paid field of work or an unpaid commitment that they've had, to make sure that they're doing okay. Practicing gratitude is a huge one. There are people who study gratitude, psychologists, sociologists, and social psychologists, who see the ways that gratitude just is a completely comprehensive way of changing your outlook on life. So you can set, for example, you can set small goals and want to do different habits. So you might say, I want to donate money more regularly. I want to make sure I vote in elections more regularly. I want to do 20 minutes of exercise every day. You can set these small habits and then we can accomplish them, and that's great. But what they've found is that people who practice gratitude as a regular part of their day end up doing all of these other things. And so it becomes this very comprehensive way of doing self-care for oneself. That writing a thank you card has helped people's happiness, like over the course of the day that they've written that letter. Even if they write it in the morning, they are happier than those who in the experiment did not write a thank you card and simply thought about good things that have happened. But there's something about the act of thanking the person, not just reflecting on the goodness, but thanking the person that changes that. And then to focus on positivity, then there can be, really hard times in our lives where we find that hard to do and difficult to do. And sometimes the best thing we can do is to simply share our grief with others. And so making sure that, especially if grief is a part of this holiday season for you or a loved one, that you're connecting with others. You can't console what's inconsolable, right? Especially when we talk about the loss of loved ones. But we can share that grief with others. And there is a dimension of healing and connectedness that comes with that. And then finally, staying connected, making sure, especially in these COVID times, this is really important for us to continue to reach out to the relationships that are important to us. All right. And then, and I did say I was going to talk about Ignatian spirituality. And some of you may have heard of Saint Ignatius, and some of you, this might be a totally new person to you. But he was born in the late 1400s and died around 1553, I'm going to say, but don't quote me on that. But he was a Basque soldier, and this is how his life began, his adulthood began. And he was wounded in battle from a cannonball, no less, which just seems like a completely amazing sort of wound to entail. It's a real story right there. And while he was in recovery, he had lots of time on his hands. And he said, I'd like a book. And they said, what sort of book would you like? And he's like, how about something on chivalry? And they're like, yeah, we don't have that here, but we do have these. And so he was given a Bible and stories of the saints, which was not what he was looking for as a ladies' man and a soldier. This was not the lifestyle, the sort of literature he was used to. And so then Ignatius of Loyola started reading these stories and realized that, and sometimes he would put the book down and he's like, well, I'll just do fantasies of the women and the battles that I've lived through before. And he realized that while there was this initial thrill of thinking about the battles, it would very quickly dissipate. He's like, this isn't actually a lasting sort of happiness. But he found that the saints became very inspiring to him, and that he saw himself growing in new ways as he was reading scriptures and the lives of the saints. And so this man, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, founded the Society of Jesus. Most people know them as the Jesuits. So the closest Jesuit university I know of is Loyola Marymount. So if you're familiar with that, or Georgetown, those are Jesuit universities. The closest Jesuit parish that I know about is in Barrio Logan. And they do a lot of work with the migrant communities and folks that live in that neighborhood. But there's a strong social justice dimension to the Jesuits. And then we can go to the next slide. And so what are the characteristics then of the spirituality that Saint Ignatius created? Well, the first one is that God is present in our daily lives. And so a lot of times when we think about God being present in our lives, we can hearken ourselves back to peak moments, right? We can think about the ways that a sunset just totally overwhelmed us, and we can have those. But Saint Ignatius, while he wanted us to enjoy those, also wanted us to find God in the small things, in the packing of lunches, in the mowing the lawn, and those sorts of things, in the everyday. And so God gives us many invitations throughout the day. And how do we choose to respond to those? That's left up to us. But he thought it was really important to make sure that we don't just wait for the big ones. He says, if you can't if you can't say yes to the small ones, like you're not going to be able to have the courage to say yes to the big ones. Ignatian spirituality is also very practical. So it's something that is definitely cultivated interiorly, and in communion with others, but it's something that starts within us. But it's something that begins ultimately from God, but it's also practical. So it shouldn't stop there. It doesn't end there. It manifests in the way we live our lives. So Ignatian spirituality definitely has an expectation of an exteriority to it. Ignatian spirituality is also very communal. And so the gospel for St. Ignatius was not for solo artists. He definitely, one of the first things he did was to gather people around him, and modeled after St. Francis, gather people around him. What do we want to do? How do we want to share this with others? So this was part of it. And he also recognized that we grow together, that this is a very important dimension of Christian formation. And there is, I worked with a woman. I did a sabbatical at Georgetown University, and there was a woman who was a sister from Africa, who was from Kenya, and she gave me this great proverb. And it was really funny because I learned there not to say from Africa, say from Nigeria, from Kenya, and there's Africa is a huge place with lots. And so, and then she said, what? There's this great African proverb, and I said, African. And she said, yeah. She says, this is actually all over Africa. And so she said, and the proverb is, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And so this was, this is the sort of, this is, first of all, what characterizes all of salvation history, right? We're going far with this. But this is also a really important component of Ignatian spirituality, to work together in this, because it's about today, but not just about today. And then finally, the fourth piece is that our emotions are trustworthy in Ignatian spirituality. There are Christian thinkers throughout the history that have been on this side of the spectrum, and some are more suspicious of emotions or desires and those sorts of things. For St. Ignatius, our emotions are trustworthy. They come from a heart. They are placed there by God. We have deep longings, and those longings can bring us to God. And so he had a great faith in our ability to be guided by these emotions. He trusted emotions more than he trusted the intellect. So this was a major part of his spirituality as well. And we can go to thank you. And then just to talk a little bit more about emotions, because I think it's an important piece of the spiritual practices that come from Ignatian spirituality. But so emotions can be kind of thought of in two categories, those of consolation and those of desolation. And what's really important here is to note that consolation does not mean positive and desolation does not mean negative. Consolation are emotions that lead us toward God, even if they're characterized by sadness, even if they're characterized by longing or disappointment, they can still be capable of leading us to God. There can be times when we feel happiness, but they're happinesses that distract us from God as well. And so we can't necessarily think that just because we feel good about an emotion, that it's a consolation. And just because we feel bad about something doesn't mean it's a desolation. Ultimately, the key question is, where are these feelings coming from and where are they leading me? So this is a really important part of reflecting on one's emotions. And just to give you a little bit more, I'm going to read from this, from my paper. So spiritual consolation, just so we can unpack this a bit more, is an experience of being so on fire with God's love that we feel impelled to praise, love, and serve God and help others as best we can. Spiritual consolation encourages and facilitates a deep sense of gratitude for God's faithfulness, mercy, and companionship in our life. In consolation, we feel more alive and connected to others. So if you were to think of like the holiday of consolation, it's Easter, right? If we think about this generativity and this new life and like new hope and just newness. This is the holiday par excellence of consolation. And Christmas is not far behind with all of the generosity and that we're invited to kindness and to think of others. To speak a little bit more about desolation, and again, I'm going to go to my paper. Spiritual desolation, in contrast, is an experience of the soul in heavy darkness or turmoil. We are assaulted by all sorts of doubts, bombarded by temptations, and mired in self-preoccupations. We are excessively restless and anxious and feel cut off from others. Such feelings, in Ignatius's words, quote, move one toward a lack of faith and leave one without hope and without love. And so these are kind of the ways to think about that, those two experiences. So ultimately, we should think of consolation as emotions that are generative and lead us to God, and desolation is isolating and pulls us away from God and goodness more generally. All right. And so if I'm going to talk about Ignatian spirituality, I feel like I should quickly define prayer as well. And so when I went to the Graduate Theological Union for my PhD, my ethics professor was Richard Gula, who wrote a book called The Call to Holiness. And he defines prayer as any act that expresses in word or gesture, and I would add in affection or disposition. Any prayer that is any act that expresses in word or gesture or affection or disposition our desire to be in the presence of God, to deepen our awareness of God, and to strengthen our relationship to God. So anything really that connects us with God, and that can look and feel all sorts of different ways. But when we are connecting and growing with God, that is prayer. And that is the point of prayer, to draw closer to God. And I'm sure everybody here has already, your faith is mature enough. It's not a wish list, right? We know that. But it is to draw us closer to goodness and the infiniteness of God's love for us. All right. And so we can go to, so some of my practices, and I have lots of Ignatian or Ignatian inspired practices. And then the 4 I'm going to talk about tonight are these. And that is the examen. Some people say examen. It's potato as far as I'm concerned. And then Ignatian contemplation, also known as imaginative prayer. And then there's self-care, which I qualify as a virtue style of self-care. And then relationships. And I'm going to spend the vast majority of my time on the examen, but we're going to look at the others as well. So go to the next slide, please. So if you go to IgnatianSpirituality.com, they had several kind of general ways of doing the examen. And it's a collaborative site, so you have lots of people kind of putting tweaks on this. 2 that I thought really stood out to me and kind of amplify the important aspects were these 2. And so we can see how they're similar and different in subtle ways. So if we want to just move to the next slide, it'll just add some things to this. There we go. So we look at number 1, become aware of God's presence. That's the first step. And on the right, it's ask God for light. Similar sorts of things, different words. So you can find an examen that speaks to your own dimension and kind of flavor of spirituality. And if you could go to the next piece, thank you. So the second one is to review the day with gratitude. And the one on the right says give thanks and review the day. So it's just step 2 kind of covers both 2 and 3 on the next side. If you could please move to the next one. So pay attention to your emotions. That one's on its own on the left side. It's just something for you to keep in mind. And I think that's a helpful way to do the examen, because it reminds you to do that. And to move to the next piece. And then to to choose one feature of the day and pray from it. And then the one on the right, it goes more to a growth piece, to face your shortcomings. So the one on the left says, something will stand out to you as you're reviewing your day. Whatever that is, stick with it and pray with that. The one on the right asks you, it's more of a how do you want to grow? Like something happened today that maybe you could have done better. Where can you find a way that you can grow from the lessons of your day? And if we could go to the next little bit, thank you. And then the final step is to look toward tomorrow. So, again, taking this reflective meaning, a practice that cultivates meaning, and then how does it generate purpose for tomorrow? All right, so thank you. We can go to the next slide. And there's lots and lots and lots of variations of the examen as well. So on this site, and these were just a few that I pulled from. There are countless kind of specializations of the examen. So examen for those experiencing anxiety, coronavirus response examen and lesson, lunchtime examen for Lent, an examen for times of illness, an examen at the end of a relationship. So we can see that there's lots of ways people have modified the examen to really speak to a specific life context. But one overall, so to tie this back to mental wellness, one benefit of the examen is gratitude. It's a real gratitude-focused practice, and it helps us, even when we use that kind of growth-oriented model of the examen, it really helps us to be grateful for the day that we experienced. It reminds us that every day is a gift, and all of even the annoyances within that day, there's a giftedness to those as well. And we can go to the next one. Thanks. And so the next, and we will be doing the examen later as a group. And then Ignatian contemplation is another one. So placing yourself in the gospel story. This is a picture of the woman caught in adultery. And what is really a way that I practice Ignatian contemplation or imaginative prayer is I will go to the gospel or whatever passage that you want to enter into. And I will record it on my phone or whatever device you have, myself reading it. And then I find it helpful to not have to read it and do the reflection at the same time. So you have and then you listen to it and you say, okay, for this story, I'm going to take the perspective of the woman caught in adultery. And I'm going to listen to this, and you read it in a very slow tempo because you want to not just think about it. You want to really feel it. You want to imagine yourself in that scene, the sights, the smells. Is it a hot day? What does it smell like? And you really want to try to truly be in that scene. And then you can reflect on what that felt like. And then you can imagine that you're one of the people holding a stone as you read this story. What do you learn from this perspective? How does that connect to your reality? You can think about this from Jesus, and then you can think about it just from you as your own personhood. Put yourself into that gospel story. Where do you see? What do you learn in that exercise? And then sort of place yourself, in these different parts of the stories from the Hebrew scriptures or the Gospels. It really has a variety of benefits. The two that tend to be very common is empathy and compassion, right? So you get to understand something from a different person's perspective. What was motivating them? When have you felt that? It's really easy to say, oh, that was a bad thing they did. And it's like, oh, sometimes the they is me, right? And you can be a little more humble with that. And then it instills compassion. And then depending on what scripture you're looking at, you're going to find different things. So forgiveness might be something you would learn from this story. Humility might be another one. To be forgiven, all sorts of things, right? So we can think about the different sorts of virtues we can learn from putting ourselves into these stories. And then going to the next slide. And then so another exercise or practice that I do is what I call self-care virtue style. And this is all ultimately rooted in one foundational principle. You were made in the image and likeness of God and are worthy of care. Maybe that's two principles. But God wants us to know really early on in the scriptures that we are made in the image and likeness of God, each of us. And just even sitting with that is its own form of self-care, to really not just know it, but to feel it and let that kind of really integrate and seep in, marinate in God's love. And then that we are worthy of care. A lot of our mental fatigue can come from running on fumes from a virtue or two. So if you're having a challenging time at work, for instance, and you're finding that you need to advocate for really basic things for yourself all the time, that's going to be really draining on, like, for example, your courage or your charitability. It's going to affect you in different ways. But as you start to kind of feel depleted in that virtue, you need to make sure that you're giving yourself the time to build that back up again. And so when you feel like you're running on fumes, take some time out. That's the third bullet point. Listen to yourself. Which virtues need replenishing for you right now? It takes, and it's hard to always identify that right away. So it's an important part of an everyday routine of self-awareness. And so some of the benefits that we get from this are most obviously self-awareness. We can have growth, peace, proper relationship, and rejuvenation. So these are some of the mental wellness benefits you'll get from this. And then going to the final practice, and we don't really think of relationships as a practice, but they need to be, because relationships are often put on the back burner. And when they're on the front burner, everything is just so much more doable. So in recognizing the significance of the Incarnation, we should realize how important our relationships are. So it's easy to think of the Incarnation as an event that happened 2,000 years ago, and that's great. But with the mingling of the divine and creation into the person of Jesus, this became a game changer for all of creation, right? Suddenly, everything creation was made for to house the Word, what came to fruition, and we can look at creation in a whole new way now. And so if we realize the significance of that, and that we're made in the image and likeness of not just a loving God, but a relational God, right? God is in a relationship with God's self. And when we realize our own relationality, we should prioritize those when it comes to the way that we live our lives. So we need to see our relationships as something we prioritize as part of our lives, not as something we get to once the real stuff is done, right? And so this is, and I say this thinking that I just canceled on a friend for lunch because I got a work obligation that came up. But yeah, so there's obviously times we need to make exceptions for these, but make sure that the exceptions are exceptions rather than the rule. And that's a great guideline for just about anything. And then the benefits that we have of being in relationships with those we love and nurturing those in an active and intentional way are belonging, meaning, activity, joy, and communion. And they can really have all sorts of wonderful benefits for us in our whole personhood. And if you could go to the next slide, I'm going to invite everyone to get comfortable. And we're going to walk through the examen together. It's going to be about a 10-minute exercise, so truly get comfortable. And then I will begin my timer. All right. So the first part, we'll do this for 1 minute. Become aware of God's presence. For the next portion of the examen, we're going to review the day with gratitude for 4 minutes. And while you do this, pay attention to your emotions. Go ahead, go ahead and choose one feature of your day and pray from it. We'll do this for 2 minutes. All right, go ahead and take what you heard in your prayer and look toward tomorrow. We'll do this for 2 minutes. Okay. Slowly come back. All right, and we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So my final slide is here, and I apologize after talking about gratitude that I didn't include a thank you slide as my final slide. But my final slide are some questions. What sorts of things, and this is, if you could just reflect on these if you're coming in over Zoom, but for those who are here, what sorts of things came up for you as you prayed the examen? How might the examen help you draw nearer to God in your everyday life? What sort of mental wellness benefits might you receive through regular practice of the examen? And what other practices of connecting to God have one or more Ignatian characteristics? And those would be, just to remind you, that I identified, that God is present in our daily lives, that it's practical, that it's communal, and that emotions are trustworthy. And, We don't need to go through these questions in order, but if there's anything that came out to you within these. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, hold on just a second. We want the people at home to hear you.
One thing that fits with the practice of connecting to the communal is harmonic prayer. From 8 to 8:30 every day in community.
Right.
That's really,
Very good.
yes, I can speak for that because I go most days as well. It's on Zoom. And the lovely community of people who get together at 8 every morning. And book a common prayer.
Very good. Yeah, and it's you, but it's also the whole of the church praying these prayers. So
Well, it's a prayer for the whole visible church,
Yeah.
but we have our little group of people that
Yeah.
everyone's invited to conferences.
sure. On Zoom, yes, yeah.
On Zoom.
Yeah. Mhm.
A gift of COVID.
Yeah.
It's a gift of COVID.
Right.
This group was started.
Very cool.
I'm here with the microphone if anybody else has an answer to any of the questions.
Oh,
In
there's
the
a
chat,
chat,
yes.
something in the chat.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh. Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, they can't see that. Sure. What sorts of things came up for you as you prayed the examen? How might the examen help you draw nearer to God in your everyday life? What sort of mental wellness benefits might you receive through regular practice of the examen? And what other practices of connecting to God have one or more Ignatian characteristics? And those would be God is present in our daily lives, and that it's practical, that it's communal, and that emotions are trustworthy. Any other thoughts?
Terry.
They can't hear you on the handheld.
Oh, they can
Oh,
hear me on the handheld mic. Oh,
Okay.
for some reason it's not working. Okay.
okay.
Would you?
Yeah. So the person had shared, I'm sorry, what was your name? If you don't mind me. Was it? Diane. Diane was saying that the morning prayer that the church participates in through Zoom connected her to God in that communal sense, that they would gather together and pray that.
Relationship with my children.
Mhm.
And one of my sons and I are maybe not quite as close as we used to be. And I think it's something that I need to work on and figure out a way to talk to him about my reactions to things that he does, well, he tells me about. And he doesn't like the way I react for some reason or another. And so I'm trying to figure out why I react that way and how I can talk to him about it.
Great. Thank you.
Can you
Yes.
repeat that for the
Yeah,
people?
sure. That sometimes we have family members who we don't necessarily understand, we both live in that same reality, but don't necessarily see that reality from a simpatico perspective. And so reflecting on, a recognition that we can't really control what the other person perceives, but we can reflect on our own experience of that and to learn from it and how we might better meet that person in their own expectations. Right. Sure. You can go to. Sure. Sure. Terry, yeah, if you could turn off, I think she heard you. Oh, wait, Terry's here. Or no, sorry, this is Kimberly. Okay, but okay. Great. Sure. Yeah, so now we can go to general Q&A.
Harry, I don't know if you can hear me, but.
Yeah, we're having a hard time. We cannot hear the handheld mic.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. So, but we're going to have to pass this back and forth. So you're going to have to like bend down. Oh, this will be interesting. So, Terry, do you want to pass on some questions and comments from the chat?
Sure. Besides the fact we couldn't hear the handheld mic, there was a comment from Faith when she was reflecting on her day. She said, my mind kept going to other people who I care about. And so I felt I was constantly being interrupted in prayer.
Yeah. Sure. Great. So yeah, I could just there's a study that's being done of people in ministry, and it's a very early study. It's going to be a 50-year study of people in ministry. And so they're just in the first 5 years of the study. But what they found is that people fresh out into ministry, one of the quotes from their interview study that they did with these people really stood out to me. And she said that, she's like, a lot of, before I went to seminary school, I would often think like I need to get away from things to really sit with God. But she's like, in seminary school, I learned that God is in the distractions. And that's another lesson that we get from the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? There was the people who passed by first, they had places to go. This was a distraction from, the priest and the scribe had important things to take care of. And then someone else came along, a Samaritan, who also had some place to go, but didn't see this person as a distraction, but someone who was to take pity on. And I think that that's a helpful lesson for us to think about is that God's in those. Yes, they will definitely take us away from, what I talked earlier about goals and purposes and those sorts of things. But how can we also see God in those distractions as well? Because God is present in everything, whether we want God there or not. So that's part of it.
Okay, right now we don't have any more questions in chat from the Zoom world.
I have a question. Maybe you could repeat that. Oh, okay. All right. So I have a question, and that is, do people, what's the sort of the timing, and how does one make this into a practice? Like, do you do this every night, and how do you make that into a part of your life? Because it seems like you're talking about some, really important stuff.
Right. I'll be down here. So one of the things with Ignatian spirituality is that it's very adaptable. It can happen in your car rides. It can happen when you're washing dishes. It can happen when you're grocery shopping. It's just a matter of you willing to step out of the ordinary to truly step into the ordinary. And so it's about an openness and a shift in imagination, being able to see things beyond what's there apparently there to what else is there. And so I think that yes, this sort of shift in imagination is probably best cultivated initially through regular practice. And so setting times aside each day, that can help get things started. But pretty soon you'll realize that you're doing it without thinking about it. It just becomes part of that routine of your day. You're starting to just see the world differently. As some people say, have your God glasses on. And so, yeah, so yes, however it helps you to start this practice, whether that's the morning, the evening, whatever works for you. Again, it's an adaptable practice. But if you stick with it, you should see it happening when you least expect it as well. So,
thank you. So any more questions from the chat?
No more questions from the chat, but I have a question.
Okay.
Could you talk to me about the similarity between this and Saint Teresa's The Simple Way?
It's a very good question. Sure.
Righty tighty, lefty loosey.
Sorry, such a height disparity. It's like, sorry. So I would say that Saint Teresa's spirituality is probably rooted more so, and maybe only, I'm not sure. I don't want to be too general. I don't want to generalize her spirituality too much, but it seems like it's really limited to those everyday details. Whereas Ignatian spirituality includes those, but we can also think about, and then how does my experience and your experience and our experience scale into a shared experience, and how can we together collectively bring this? So that would be, and I know a lot more about Ignatian spirituality than I do about Saint Teresa's. So you might be saying, no, hers works the same way. But I don't know, Terry, if you want to add anything to.
No, that was a great way to compare them. Thank you.
I guess we're done with questions. All right, so now you're going to vote. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say an incredible thank you to Dr. Day. I know that some of these reminders of taking care of ourselves, especially at this time of year, are very, very important, and all the dimensions for that. But also to think more about, I felt like this was like a little taste of something really big, that Ignatian spirituality has a lot of dimension to it. And we got kind of a little thank you for walking us through it, but also gave us a sense of how much is there for us, and a wonderful reminder at this time of year, I think, to sort of be connecting in those ways as part of taking care of ourselves. So I'm just very, very grateful. Thank you. And you've really inspired me. She's saying thank you to everybody on Zoom too. Yeah, yeah. So, all right. Before the closing prayer, I have a few announcements. The first is Women Together needs volunteers. We're looking for anyone who wants to help, but we are especially looking for volunteers that are comfortable with technology to help with Zoom. Helping with Zoom is a small commitment. It's being a co-host once a month for a few hours. So if you or anybody who's interested in volunteering for Women Together, please let us know. Email me, call me, contact any of the other women connected to Women Together. Also, donate. Please donate. We're not providing wine and dinners. So if you like our programs on our webpage, on the Cathedral website, at the very, 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 very bottom, there's a button to donate now, and any amount is appreciated. And more importantly, we have an online evaluation that we do every time we have an event. So that will be sent out to you in an email, and everybody who's signed up, but also it's right now posted on our webpage on the Cathedral website. So we really appreciate everybody who fills out those evaluation forms. We love to get your comments and your thoughts, especially, and your suggestions for other speakers and other events. So please do that. And the video recording of this Zoom session will be posted on the Cathedral website in a few days. It's not immediate. So next week you can look for it there. Again, you go to stpaulcathedral.org, the Connect menu item and Women Together, and then you find our page and you can scroll down in there and you can find the videos at the bottom. So you're wondering about next month, right? Well, January is our time that we take a break, and so that our volunteers aren't working over the holidays. So our next Women Together event will be in February, and it will be the Reverend Laurel Matheson, who many of you already know, speaking with two of the women from her parish at St. Luke's, and that's Ms. Catherine Baum and Ms. Ruth Japtok. And they're going to talk about journeying together across cultures with humility, respect, and joy. So it's in an age when we can get confused, concerned about engaging with other cultures in the right way. These three women from St. Luke's are going to talk about how we can engage with faith, food, and cultural art across cultures with mutual respect and joy. So that should be really interesting. And I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you again to all of our amazing volunteers and cathedral staff who made this event possible. It's such a joy to be able to put together these events, and I really, really appreciate it. And I know we all really appreciate everyone who helps. So to end the evening now, let us pray. O God of peace, you have taught us that in returning and rest we shall be saved. In quietness and confidence shall be our strength. By the might of your Spirit, lift us, we pray you, to your presence, where we may be still and know that you are God. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.